作为一个孩子的妈妈，对于教育，我有许多的交流。教育的本质是什么？如何培养事业未来世界的孩子？生命成长第二季，我们继续探讨教育的多种可能性。
Live in a fast-changing world, the future will be different from the past. So whatever happened in the past, what was important in the past, may not be a good predictor for what's necessary in the future.
奥托·夏默，麻省理工大学教授，他创造了非常世界的 U 型理论。他将与我们一起分享，面对未知，我们需要什么样的知识？什么才是创造的本质？如何树立孩子的自信心？怎样接受感知的引导，连接更深层次的觉知？
No one knows what the future will look like. Probably only one thing we know pretty much for sure, which is that we will deal a lot more, and our children will deal a lot more with disruption, right? With situations where something is breaking an old way of operating, and without much help and without much knowledge, we need to deal with the situation, feel out what the next steps is, and operate in an environment that's complex, where we don't know what tomorrow will look like, and yet we have to decide and move forward.
那怎么可以做到呢？
Well, I think when you ask people, when you ask successful innovators, when you ask people who created something really new in science or in business or in society, what they will tell you is when you face such a situation, what really matters is not what you know in your head, but it's the knowing of your heart. So I think when you deal with disruption, when the old way of operating is hitting the wall, everyone is confused and no one knows how to move forward. What you're relying on in such a situation is the knowing of the heart. So I would say what it takes in such a situation is a combination of three types of knowledge. The knowing of the mind, the knowing of the head, of course, right? So that remains to be important. But then you need to add to that the knowing of the heart, which can sense into a situation, right? For example, in a dialogue, I can, with empathy, kind of feel myself into what another person is feeling. Mm-hmm. And then, most importantly, the knowing of the hand. So how we learn from doing and how we learn to take steps in situation where there is no clear external guidance. Because in the past, we used to have very clear external guidance. But in the future, a lot of that will break up. And still, we need to act. So that's what I would say, kind of three types of knowledge, right? The knowledge of the head, the knowing of the heart, and the knowing of the hand.
作为个人来讲，我是如何可以达成这三部分呢？
Usually, schools today only take care of the head. The problem with the head is the knowledge you learn in school will be outdated. Most of that will be outdated by the time you graduate. So that means what's more important than learning for test, right, is learning how to learn. Because in the future, you will face situations where you don't know. And then the most important learning is how do you respond to such a situation. So learning with your head, that's the open mind, right? So that you can access your not knowing and that you inquire into things that you don't know. The learning of the heart has everything to do with empathy and with compassion, right? So it's the capacity for me to sense into what another person is feeling and to listen. Worldwide, what people often say is the best school system in the world is the Finnish system. And there's a bunch of things you can say about the school systems. But what I find more interesting is what parents do in Finland. What parents do with their children when they are small is that you take them into the wood and you teach them how to listen to the trees, how to listen to nature. And the way you do that is to access stillness. So you have stillness in nature. Because the only way to access the knowing and the listening of your heart is that you slow down the mind. you're not talking, but you're really listening. You're going into a moment of stillness and you begin to attend to the trees, because trees are not just objects, they are living beings. And when you have the ability to feel inside the trees and to feel inside of other human beings, it gives you a fantastic foundation for being truly creative in whatever field you choose to do later on. That can be manual creative work, that can be in science, that can be in business. So those are the real foundation. So that's kind of number two, right? The knowing of the heart. And the third one is the knowing of the hand. And that's really the essence of the creative process. So I would say in a good school, you do a lot yourself. For example, I went to a Waldorf school. So rather than learning everything out of books, right, that someone else wrote for you, we had to each day write our own book, right? Mm-hmm. So based on what we heard, kind of translate that into a story that you write yourself. So the whole maker culture, right? So that you make your own things, that you not only deal with ready-made objects, but that in many ways you gain the confidence, you can develop an idea, which you then realize kind of with things you do. And in this process of realization, something happens which is not exactly your idea, but something even more interesting, right? Mm-hmm. So the creative process. If you have done that many times, then when you are thrown into a new situation, you are not nervous, you're not driven by fear. Even though you don't know what you need to do, you have the confidence to step into that situation. And as you step into that situation, possibilities will arise. Mm-hmm. But if you just remain fearful outside, nothing is going to happen, right? You have to have the courage to step into the unknown. And that's what you want your kids to learn, right? That they are confident, that they have action confidence. Because what counts in companies is not only knowing the right things, is not only communicating in an effective way with others, but it's action confidence. And action confidence means we have a faraway goal. I don't know how we can get there. And yet I have the confidence to take the first steps and to read the feedback that I have become, so that I move through this process, the creative process, that often challenges me with new challenges that I didn't anticipate. And sometimes I discover I'm at a dead end and need to turn around and go back and then make another choice, so that I am emotionally mature enough to know all of that is part of the creative journey. Mm. And all of that is part of conceiving an idea and bringing that into reality. So, and that's really the essence of the creative process. If you learn that in school, it's a great preparation for life, because that kind of skill is important today already, mm-hmm. and will be even more important tomorrow. Your own heart, your own passion, that's the key for creativity. You cannot do great work if you cannot access your own passion. That's a skill you need to learn in school, and you need to learn as a young person. The problem with today's schools is that most schools, almost all of them, mm-hmm. don't teach that to children. So that's where, as a parent, you have a special responsibility in two ways. Either take your kid out of such a normal school and bring it to, a school that is nurturing the whole human being, right? Head, heart, and hand, not only the head. If that's not possible for you as a parent, that may be the case, then ask yourself how you can complement the curriculum that the school is taking care of with maybe additional activities, right? Take your kids into nature, minimize screen time, take them into human relationships that really matter, expose them to people who operate based on their passion, kind of expose them to these kind of environments, and allow them to play, and most importantly, allow them to do what they love to do, right? So follow their own passion rather than always being told by teachers or parents what's the next activity you have to do. And that's probably the worst thing about today's education, both here in China and in the United States and many other countries, that kids are micromanaged to death, right? Which kills creativity and kills the foundation of being self-confident and creative person later on. And that foundation is access within yourself what you want to do and make a move into that direction, right? Because once you can do that, you get into a positive energy cycle. And that's what gives you confidence.
那刚才你说的，我们这3种能力，那都很重要。如果小朋友上学的时候，他有机会接触到，他能锻炼起这种能力，那是最好的。但是可能有些孩子他就没有机会，那他如何可以去培养这些能力呢？
When we are born, we have these capacities already, but they're dormant. We all have them. It's just that we go to schools and we work in professional environments where a lot of the main practices is socializing these capacities out of us. So a school that's, overly relying on teaching for testing is the enemy of real learning, right? With real learning, I mean accessing the open mind and then accessing the open heart and accessing the knowing of the hand. That's being socialized out of us. So I would say in the beginning, we all have that. So when they, can't get to a better school, what can they do? I think the first thing is how we as parents connect with our children in terms of our expectations. And I think the first and most important thing we probably can do is to understand what is kind of the dormant potential in our children. And, for some, it may be kind of an academic career. For some, it may be a different kind of the real skills may be kind of more on an artistic level or more kind of on a practical level. Whatever that is, kind of to expose our children to multiple environments where all these dormant capacities could be activated. And I think a particular role in that has arts practices, because they allows us to move through some process where something is manifesting from nothing to something. And it's kind of that process that gives us confidence to deal with difficult and unknown situations later on. And it's also a process that puts us into the driver's seat of a situation. So where I'm not just a victim, or I'm not just watching what other people, a movie kind of they created, but I'm, developing and writing and creating my own movie, right? And I think that's kind of really a kind of environment that you want to create for your children. So it's kind of my own expectation that I moderate my expectations according to what are the real dormant capabilities kind of my children, right? Which may be different to my own. In Italy, kind of a very famous school approach that talks about the third teacher, right? There are 2 teachers we all know. The first is the student, right? Oh, okay. The learner himself. And then the second one is the educator, right? It's the teachers and the parents. So those are the first 2 teachers. The third teacher is space and nature. It's the space we are in. It's a very important decision. So that's your responsibility. The kid has nothing to do with the space. That's what you're responsible for. So is it just built environment, or is it a natural environment? And how much do you have like quiet quality space where they can develop their own rhythm? That would be another one. And, we know exactly kind of when we go to certain places, we feel good, right? We calm down. Also in nature, there are like special places that, speak to us, that when we are there, they help us to really calm down and kind of be more present and connect more with the deeper levels of our own self. That's, I would say, a third activity there. I believe, personally, there's a fourth teacher, and the fourth teacher is the social field. That means it's the quality of relationships kind of that we have there's nothing better for kids than experiencing creative social fields. Now, what's the most important social field, right? Anyone is growing up with, right? The field of our family, right? It's the quality of relationship, not only directly to the children, but also we have with our spouses, kind of with our friends, kind of, it's that kind of atmosphere, kind of the type of interaction that has an enormous influence. It's also the type of life we live, right? So it's what's important for kids. It's not what we say, the values we talk about, the values that we live, right? So it's through our actions, of course. So it's the culture, right, and the social field of the family, but it's also the other social fields. So you can see a different one maybe in a theater group or in a project that you participate in. So I think that's just another, and a good school, in my view. So what's the single best criteria for a good school? A good school is a school that has a good social field, where there's a loving, co-creative relationship, where you pay attention to the individual needs and capacities of children, and where they learn also kind of to be respectful with each other, for all the reasons that we discussed earlier. So I lived, when we got our first child, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, next to MIT, one of the hot spots of education in the world and in the United States. So my colleagues at MIT, many of them, so they would take their children off into a prep school, a high school that for sure brings your kids into the top university, right? It sounds good. And I know many people in China do that, right? But the proposition has a problem. And it also works for some. So let's also say the current school system is working for some, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is that for many kids, it's not working. What happens in the prep schools, kind of, that put you on that track to, move into the Ivy League schools, is that you over-focus on some few mental capacities and you underdevelop the other capacities. Most importantly, the students always respond to external pressure, but they're always told what they have to do. That's the kiss of death in terms of true creativity. How does the creative process start? With boredom, right? Out of nothing, something is being born. But today, our kids suffer scarcity of boredom because, one, there's always something our parents want us to do, or our schools, kind of, we are managed from one activity to another. If we have a little moment, we kill it with technology. We go to our devices, right? So those are the two big enemies confronting us with ourselves, with our own boredom, out of which then I move into a process that I generate, where I'm not just reacting to something that I'm exposed to, but where I take an impulse out of myself. And our choice was not to put our kids in a high school to a prep school, but to put them into that's called a progressive school, right? A progressive school is where the pressure for academic performance is moderate. So you're not overly pressured. Yes, kind of a few students make it to the Ivy League schools, but that's not the sole objective. But the benefit that you have is that they can develop their own path, that they can access their own passion, that they have a broader variety to choose from, not just kind of a few narrow academic facilities that often only reflect the past and not the future. So in that regard, we made a choice. And as a parent, that's not always easy because I'm at MIT, right? Of course, I want my kids to be at MIT, right? But on the other hand, I also learned that I grew up on a farm. The most important thing that my parents did for me is, A, send us to a good school, kind of, that was looking at the whole human being. But B, to not impose their idea onto us, what they wanted us to be, right? So then I would have become a farmer, for example, right? Now, farming is a very important role in society. but it probably would have not been the best role for me. So we have always been encouraged by our parents to follow our own path, to follow our own heart. I'm very thankful for that because I think that's exactly what I try to pass on to our children. What's important is that they find in their life their own passion and follow that path, regardless where that is leading them. That's what I believe. That's kind of what helped me to step into my real potential. And that's exactly what I wish for my children. What's the biggest enemy of creativity? Doing stuff for money. And, incentivized compensation packages is another enemy of creativity because we force ourselves to do something in order to do something else. That's not how you access creativity. If you talk to really creative people and you kind of uncover the deeper story, it almost never has anything to do with money. It results into money, yes, but the process has nothing to do with money. The process has one pathway, which is access what it is that you love doing. Mm-hmm. So that would be kind of my first suggestion, to notice what it is that you truly love, and then to create small steps, kind of small practice fields around that. Even though at first it may look very remote from anything you can earn money with, or anything that will have a practical usefulness. Humanism. So for example, Steve Jobs, the founder or co-founder of Apple, in college. So he dropped out of college, and that was the best decision he ever took, he said, because he stopped doing stuff that was required of him to do in order to pass the exam, and only did things that he loved doing. And one was aesthetics. So it was kind of Japanese kind of aesthetics of typesetting and so forth. And that's where he developed the aesthetic sense that we see is built into the Apple machines and kind of the Apple user interface, which now is popular by everyone. But when you know the earlier machines, what they looked like and felt like, you know what a quantum leap that was. And it only when he learned that capacity, it had nothing to do with practical usefulness. He did it because he loved doing it.
Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world, ones who do.
You do something because of itself, because you care, because it's important to you. That gets you on a pathway, also allows you to access a level of energy that moves you in a direction where you begin to access more of your real creativity. So I think that's what a good school does. That's what a good university does. It gives you possibility to access what you love doing. And when you are already in an organization, already have a career, you can do the same thing. But you need to create an environment for that, because often it's hard to do. In our current environment, that's kind of very materialistic, let's face it, right? It's all about money, of course, what everyone is talking about. And everything is loud and noisy, and so access your stillness, that's a hard thing to do. That's why every artist, what do they have? They have their own studio. You design a space for that. What's a hoarding space for that? And who might be, or maybe it's a coach, kind of some people I can talk about, we can help each other, kind of with deep listening. Often it's small groups can support each other in this way. Work on what your true intention is in life. I think at the source of all creativity is the power of intention, knowing what it is that you want to create, what the future is you want to create. So there's a skill to be developed, to be truthful what your real intention is long term. Hold that in your mind and hold that in your heart, while at the same time being real with current reality, to not have illusions about kind of the current state of affairs. seeing both of these things, the current reality and what might be possible, and feeling yourself into that. I think that's a skill very important for anyone who moves into the creative process.
您说的就是要很清楚自己的意图，但是很多人都说我不知道我未来想干嘛，我也不知道我下一步想做什么，如何能去找到自己的意图呢？
Pay attention to your frustration. You're only frustrated about things where you have something deeper underneath that current reality, a deeper need or deeper aspiration that is not happening right now. So when you pay attention to your frustration, that's a good gateway into unearthing your real intention. I would say most people can become a little bit depressed or discouraged when you realize, okay, this direction is my attention, but today I'm only here. I have no idea how to get from here to there. And that's why I would say you don't have to know how to get from here to there. It's not necessary to have a plan. What's necessary is only two things. One is a good sense of the direction, your intention, where you want to go. And two, a clear sense of what's the next practical step. And if you kind of just when you climb a mountain, you don't need to figure out what happens 25 meters up. You just need the next foothold. You need to know where you put your foot next. That's what you want to pay attention to. And then when you do that, when you take that step, the next one will become apparent. And then the next, and then the next. And then you monitor your own energy, whether you're moving in the right direction of your intention or whether you actually lose the energy and maybe you need to course correct and move into a different direction. So that's a fairly simple process. So I have found it's not, if you deal with emerging future, if you deal with disruptive change, you don't have to figure out how to get from here to there. You have to figure out what's the direction you want to go, and you have to figure out the next step. And from that next step, the next one will emerge. So that's what I would say. So you said, okay, I'm in a normal environment. How do I begin? Here's another suggestion. Doing nothing. That's the hardest thing to do. Every day, do nothing, right? Doing nothing is underrated in our culture. Everyone is busy and jumping around, and we think that's kind of being important, right? The opposite is true. Doing nothing is underrated because doing nothing is the gateway to creativity. So what I mean with doing nothing is stillness. So we discontinue our habitual way of operating, our habitual talking, our standard habitual ways of communication. So I disengage, choose a period of stillness. Any of us, if you really want, you can find 5 minutes, right? For sure. So in most of us do that early morning. You get up a little earlier than the others and you use 5 or 10 or 20 minutes in the morning doing nothing, which means kind of moving into a process of stillness and where you basically tune out all the noise and focus on what's essential for you. Focus on something, maybe on your own intention, or maybe kind of something that you pick. And by focusing on that and tuning out everything else, you begin to move into an energy that's not triggered by outside events, but where you hold your attention from within. And that, if you sustain that attention, it shifts your own level of energy. And it allows you then to connect more deeper with your own intention. Because let's just face it, the moment we switch on our cell phone, the moment we enter the office, we already know what's going to happen. Chaos is jumping into our face. So that's going to happen anyway. We cannot control that. What it is we can control is how we respond to that. And the response, when you have such a morning practice, for example, will be more likely be grounded in your own intention and not grounded in reacting out of fear in order to avoid something. That's another place to begin. 10 minutes a day doing nothing. If you do that every day, over time, those 10 minutes will turn into a source that allows you to connect with your own being, with who you really are, and with your deeper sources of creativity in a much more reliable way than otherwise.